Hello, this is um, PPSC 031, Spring Wildflowers. Um, this is our second lecture on the pea family, on the legumes, also known botanically as the Fabaceae. It corresponds to the second lecture of week 7, um, and the lecture date is Wednesday, May 13th of year 2020. Let me go to the screen sharing again and continue the lecture we started last Monday, the 11th, May the 11th, on the pea family. Okay, as we mentioned in the last class, there are 3 subfamilies in the Fabaceae. And it's an interesting thing. You might also recall the 4 subfamilies of the Rosaceae. But the contrast is that while in the Rosaceae, the flower in all plants of the rose family is very similar. It has 5 white petals and a hypanthium, and they're all actinomorphic. They're all radially symmetrical. The legumes, the Fabaceae, have strikingly different strikingly different flowers between families, but the fruit is always the same. So the constant identifying factor in the family Fabaceae is the fruit. The first family, the Papilionoideae, where you can see here the main traits. It's formed by herbs, shrubs, or even trees. Leaves of the Papilionoideae are mostly pinnately or palmately compound, but palmate or pinnate. Petals are distinct. So you have 5 separate petals, but the flowers are extraordinarily zygomorphic. They're very highly zygomorphic. And the stamens are normally fused. 9 stamens are fused and around the ovary, and 1 may be free, or the 10 stamens may be completely fused. This is an illustration of the San Diego vetch, where you can actually see the papilionaceous flower. You can see it very well here. 1 petal normally is found above the flower, and it's known as the banner petal. The role of a banner petal is basically to show the pollinator, the insect, the presence of a flower. It's a display structure, basically. And then it has 2 petals that open outside, and then 2 other petals that are fused inside. The 2 fused petals inside are known as the keel, and the 2 petals that open outside are known as the wings. So the papilionaceous flower, known papilionaceous because of a similarity, fairly remote similarity with butterflies, papilium in Latin. The papilionaceous flower of the Fabaceae has, remember, 1 banner, 2 wings, and 2 fused petals forming a keel. All the sexual parts are inside the keel. Here I have illustrated 1 stamen and the style with the stigma coming out. All the sexual parts are inside the keel. The papilionaceous flower is an incredibly efficient pollinating machine. When an insect comes and gets inside the flower looking for nectar that is down here, it will put its weight on the keel and bring the keel down. The 2 petals, as they fall down, they open and they put the insect in contact with the style, the stigma, the female part, and then immediately later with the male parts, normally in that order. So it can get the pollen from another flower first and then impregnate the insect with the pollen from this flower. You can see the typical leaf of legumes in general, the papilionaceous, compound leaves with folioles. Normally, almost all legumes have two stipules. You can see the stipules here in the base. And in the case of this, the San Diego pea, it has the central nerve of the leaf eventually turns into an attachment structure. The plant is a climber, and it ties itself with a twining central nerve of the leaves into other plants on which it climbs. We have here some illustrations, some photographs, sorry, of a family. You can see very well, like for example, in these flowers or in this one, you can see, first of all, the banner petal, which is large, and it plays a role for display. The two wings on the side that basically direct the insects, and the keel inside the two wings that supports or maintains inside, encases the sexual parts. Here's a cut of a flower where you can see very well let's start from the female parts above, the ovary. It's an elongated structure with the ovules inside, formed by only one carpel. It has a single carpel. Remember, the fruit in all legumes, in all the family of the Fabaceae, is a legume. The stamens, they're all fused at the base. 9 of them are fused. In the Papilionaceae, one stamen may be free. It's normally free. You can see the banner petal. You can see the wing petal, and you can see the keel that forms together with the opposite keel petal, an encasing where the sexual parts are. You can imagine it very, very well. An insect getting here where the nectar is will step on the keel, bring it down, and first it will get hit by the stigma that gets the pollen from the previous flower, and then it will be hit by the anthers that will fill the insect, will cover the insect with pollen from this flower. Some important plants in this family, all the beans, including the soybean, Glycine max, the soybean, a very, very important agricultural crop. You can see again always the same structure: the banner, the wing, the keel with the sexual part forming a column inside. The peanut also belongs in this group. And of course, all the beans in general, the common bean, the navy bean, the kidney beans, the lima beans, and of course also the lentils and cowpeas, they all belong in this group. This is the group that gives us the really important legume seeds that we eat. Okay, then on the other extreme of flower morphology, there is a family known as the Mimosoideae, because it has the name of the first species described within that subfamily, the mimosa. And the Mimosoideae are mostly tropical or subtropical. There are a few Mimosoideae growing in the California deserts. They're woody plants with normally with twice compound leaves, bipinnate leaves. The inflorescence normally occurs in heads and very dense spikes or heads. The flowers are actinomorphic. They're not zygomorphic at all. And the head is what actually attracts the insects. The petals are inconspicuous. They're almost gone, very difficult to see. And the stamens are long and colorful, and they act really as the attractant for pollinators. You can see here, this is the common mesquite in the California deserts, Prosopis glandulosa. You can see the doubly compound leaves. You can see the petiole, one folio, another folio, and the folios are themselves divided into leaves. And you can see the inflorescence here, dense, in the case of a mosquito, spike, a dense spike of flowers, of which normally one or two leaves, one or two flowers will become fertilized. All the other flowers, even if they get pollen, will be aborted because the plant cannot support more than 2 or 3 pods at each fruit peduncle. The flower itself, if you look at it in the microscope, and we will do that in the in-person class, if you look at the flower itself, it has 5 sepals. It has 5 petals that are very, very small. And it has long, velvety stamens with anthers on top. In the case of a mesquite, they're normally yellow colored, and that acts as an attractant to pollinators. Look, that as opposed to the papilionoide, where the stamens are normally fused, here the stamens are free, and it has one elongated style with a sticky stigma on top. Important plants in this family, all the acacias that form the savannas and dryland ecosystems, dry grasslands in Africa, in Australia, in South America. You can see in the mimosa tree very well here the bipinnate leaves, and you can see the flowers. Really, the attractant in the flowers is the stamens themselves. It has a multitude of stamens, by the way. Mentioned, I forgot to mention that, as opposed to the papilionoide that have only 10 stamens. In the subfamily Mimosoideae, they have a lot of stamens. In some, the heads are not so dense, but always the flowers in a head, and you can see the calyx, the corolla tube that are very small, and then the staminal tube at the base. The stamens might be fused, and then they open profusely to generate the attractant. And many tropical trees like Inga, Albizia, and many others, some of them cultivated as street trees, commonly cultivated in California, like Albizia. In many, it's a frequently cultivated tree within the group of the Mimosoida. The acacias, instead of making a spike, are perfectly round. They form these beautiful yellow pompon-like structures. You can always see the bipinnate leaves that are so typical of this group. In the acacias, very often the stipules of the leaves are transformed into spines, and some acacias have a beautiful example of coevolution. The spines, the stipular spines become enlarged and provide shelter for ants that live inside the enlarged spines. And the ants patrol the tree, making sure it's not attacked by other insects, because the plants very often have these structures here that are known as extrafloral nectaries in the tip of the leaves, or sometimes along the stem. The plants will give a quote-unquote bribe to the ants by providing house and food, and the ants that can be incredibly aggressive will provide defense for the plant. Also in this group, hence the name mimosa, that in Spanish means lovingly. The plants, when you touch them, they sort of, they're sensitive, the leaves close. So mimosa also means lovingly or cuddly. The leaves, when you just caress the plant, you touch it a little bit, the leaves will close for some 10, 15 minutes, and then they open again. So very often they have sensitive leaves. And finally, the last group in this family is the Cisalpinoideae, the Cisalpinia subfamily. Like the Faboidea, the flowers are zygomorphic, but they don't have a closed keel that makes a case for the sexual parts. The stamens are usually free; they're rarely fused, and they're 10, like a Fabaceae, or less. But the flower is never papilionoid, but more open. A typical example, which you will see in the microscope in class, is the Palo Verde of our deserts in California. You can see the compound leaf here, also bipinnate, like the mimosoid. Very commonly in the Cisalpinoid, the leaves are bipinnate. You can see here the flower, and you can see an illustration of the flower here. The banner petal is not as big as it is in the papilionoid flowers in the subfamily Fabaceae, and the keel petals are these two down here. They're not encased, forming a closed structure for the sexual part. So it looks almost actinomorphic, almost radially symmetrical, but it does have a one single plane of symmetry. Very often the top petal, you can see here the illustration, the top petal is also colored differently to attract insects. And of course, like in all others, the fruit is a pod. In the subfamily Cisalpinoideae, we have the redbud, Cercis occidentalis, very common in the California mountains. If you go in spring to the sequoia forests in the high Sierras, you will see them all over the place. They're small trees that are the first to flower. As soon as the freezing temperatures decrease, they flower immediately. You can see here the flower of the redbud. The redbud is one of the most zygomorphic within the subfamily. It has a banner petal, but the wing is larger than the banner petal. And the keel here below is actually not completely fused. More typical of the family, Cassia fasciculata, the partridge pea. You can see here, it has one fairly inconspicuous, you can see it here, one banner petal, two wings, and the keel petals are below here. They're fairly large and not enclosing the sexual parts. Some important plants in the family, Cisalpinia, in the subfamily, sorry, Cisalpinia pulcherrima. If you've ever been to the Caribbean, you will see it all over the place, known as pride of Barbados. It's really an African plant that was introduced to the Caribbean during the horrible years of the slave trade and the plantations, the sugar plantations in the Caribbean. But it stayed behind. You can see the banner petal is fairly small. The two wings, lateral petals, very large. And then, of course, below here, it has the keel petals that are open. And the sepals are also colorful. And you can see also that in this plant, the 10 stamens are also colorful. Delonyx regia, very related to the previous one, known as flamboyant, also has a flower. You can see the banner petal is normally clear in color and spotted. You can see the two wings, and then the keel also opens. Important plants within this group, the tamarind, Tamarindus indica, that the pod, as we discussed in the previous class, is almost like a drupe. It's fleshy, and the flesh is, the mesocarp is fleshy, and the flesh is very nice to eat. And Gymnocladus diocus of the southern part of the United States, very planted as a street ornamental tree. It has been used and is still used in some parts to make coffee. If you roast the seeds and you grind them, you have to roast them well because they're toxic. Remember we talked about lectins in legumes, but if you roast the seeds very well and then grind them, they make something that tastes like coffee, and an acceptable, passable drink, let us call it that way. Cassia angustifolia, very commonly planted throughout Southern California. It's used as a laxative, and you can find products made from Cassia angustifolia like Senocot. Um, and some California genera. We already saw Cercis occidentalis, the red bush, in the high Sierras. In near California, near Riverside, and all the mountain slopes or the lower mountain slopes near California, Astragalus pomonensis, the Pomona locoweed. It's called locoweed because the pod is inflated. It's almost like a rattle, has this, and so it's sort of a crazy pod, and hence the name locoweed. This belongs in the Fabaceae. You can see the papilionoid in the Faboideae subfamily. You can see the papilionoid flowers. Um, we already saw an illustration of this one, Lathyrus vestitus, the San Diego pea, that has the leaves transformed, the tip of the leaves is twining, is transformed into tendrils that allow the plant to attach itself to other plants. Also in the Faboideae, it has a papilionoid flower, it's papilionaceous. The American vetch, also common in chaparral, it attaches itself to plants in chaparral. Very similar to the San Diego pea, very, very pretty, very beautiful. The spring vetch, Vicia sativa, introduced from Europe. The seeds are edible. You can make good stews with it. The sweet pea, Lathyrus odoratus, found frequently in Southern California. Lotus coparius, they changed the name now for some reason of preeminence, like Miscon glaber, the deerweed. It's all over the place in the mountains around Los Angeles and Riverside and Southern California. It's because it's a legume and it's a very, very powerful nitrogen fixer. Plays a huge role in providing nitrogen to the ecosystem, and it's really loved by deer. Hence, it's known as deer weed because it's so rich in protein. It's an excellent forage. And of course, the lupins. There are dozens of different lupins in the mountains around Southern California. Here, I put an illustration of Lupinus bicolor. There are many other species of lupins around our region. The flowers in the lupin form a dense spike that can be very, very pretty in spring. And other plants introduced but common, Spartium junceum, the Spanish broom, also known as gorse. It's a European plant, very pretty in flowers. It's weedy. It's a terrible weed, really. But the flowers can be incredibly pretty. And you find them on the sides of the road if you go out, for example, Big Bear Mountains on route to Lake Arrowhead. The white clover, you see it in lawns all over our campus, although gardeners want them out. They weed them out because they want grass and not clover. The white clover is incredibly good at surviving. It has stolons, remember, ground level stems that propagated very, very well. It makes dense heads of flowers, and the flowers themselves are again papilionaceous. They're in the subfamily Faboideae. And let's go to the desert now. We're almost done. The Palo Verde, common plant in the desert. When the Palo Verdes are in flower, our deserts in Palm Deserts, Palm Springs, and all the mountains around, all California deserts become flushed with yellow because the trees are in flower. It's one of the most beautiful trees. The fairy duster in the Mimosoideae, you can see here the flower. It's almost devoid of petals and sepals. They're so reduced. And what makes the plant attractive, it gets beautifully red in spring when the fairy duster is in flower. It is because of the stamens. The stamens are red. Let us summarize the three subfamilies. We have it here. The subfamily Faboideae, also known as papilionoid legumes, they have the typical papilionoid flower, strongly, very, very strongly zygomorphic. On the other extreme, the subfamily Mimosoides, the Mimosa subfamily, mostly tropical plants with very reduced petals, very reduced calyx, and it's the stamens themselves that generate the color and the attractiveness of a flower. The flowers are in dense clusters that look like almost like flowery or like fluffy pompons. And in the middle, somewhere in the middle, the sesalpinoid flowers, they have 5 petals, exactly like the papilionoid, but they're not so strongly zygomorphic and they don't have a closed keel. They do have 2 lower petals that form something like a quote-unquote keel, but it's never closed. So this is the subfamily Papilionoideae, this is the subfamily Mimosoideae, and this is the subfamily Sesalpinoideae. Let me stop sharing here, and we're done with this lecture. We're getting there with the course. Next Friday, the 10th, we are going to see an extremely interesting family in terms of Darwinian evolution and adaptation, the cactus family. We're going to see the Cactaceae, one of the family of plants with the most intense level of morphological transformation that has allowed them to colonize extreme environments with great success, and especially tolerance for drought. Apart from being a beautiful and very interesting family, the Cactaceae have a lot of potential as future crops in desert environments, now that with global climate change, our world is becoming drier and hotter. They're amazing plants for the survival in deserts. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. And we're going to have our next lecture Friday, May the 15th. Thank you.